weekday 8 a.m. onwards on Radio Sri Lanka. Listen to Radio Sri Lanka 97.4 and 97.6 island-wide for Coffee with Dan.
Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Dan. This morning I have a very important guest in studios. He was the former chairman of Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation, or what we call the Radio Sri Lanka and Radio Ceylon, and presently the Director General of Government Information. He's none other than Mr. Sudarshana Gunawardana, attorney at law. So good morning and welcome to Coffee with Dan, Sudarshana.
Good morning, Dan. It's a pleasure.
So, having coffee with Sudarshana today, this morning, I thought of talking about the type of leadership the country needs at the moment. There's a lot of talking going around. What sort of a leader should govern Sri Lanka? But however, we know that under the 1978 Constitution, which is almost 40 years old now, we have an executive president. To become an executive president, you need the people's vote. And it's not an easy task. So, how do you see the executive presidency in this country? Is it workable or not workable?
Well, Dan, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this show. And I'm really glad to see this show is progressing and you're doing great. The question, the executive presidency, and also what kind of leadership. Yeah, let's focus on executive presidency. I think that this presidency was introduced in 1978 as a result of the majority feeling that the existing system is not working. Because 1977, the government lost badly and opposition voted into power by 5-6 majority. So that opposition, the United National Party, thought that we need to make a major change. And change in the sense, they need to make a change by connecting the international capital to Sri Lanka. To connect, they thought they need to do changes in the constitution. So they brought a constitution that protects freedoms and protect private property. So executive presidency was introduced in that backdrop. And now 40 years down the line, so the presidency survived with certain changes. So maybe this is what at the moment we are destined to have. Shall I put that way?
Yes, it's true. But some feel that it is really not the constitution that matters, but it's about the character of the person that matters. Whoever who comes into power, how he rules the country. Now, we have been seeing several presidents who rule this country after the 1978 Constitution came into being. Several executive presidents were in power. In considering the characters of these different personalities, do you think that it's a time to change, or should we proceed with the executive presidency? Because we know that there's so much discussion going on that the 21st amendment to the Constitution, 20th Amendment, I beg your pardon, 20th Amendment is on the way to abolish the executive presidency. So what are your thoughts about that?
Dan, first of all, let me make a personal declaration that I express my views in my personal capacity, not as a Director General of Government Information, so it does not mean that I express government position here. And I personally have been coming from the left tradition. And traditionally, we have been opposing to the executive presidency. Dr. N.M. Perera wrote a book soon after the introducing of executive presidency, actually explaining why it is not suitable. Leftists traditionally have been opposing to that, including SLFP. So there was a huge demand that they should be abolished, and every election was fought while UNP was for retaining the executive presidency, and the SLFP and the left were unified in efforts to abolish it. But in 1994, actually the left got into power. So they had this opportunity, and they actually promised. President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga promised and even signed an agreement with JVP, and that's the reason JVP supported her. Actually, the abolishing of executive presidency has become a rallying point for the anti-UNP forces to get together. But what happened, since 94, there have been various attempts, but they could not manage to abolish. So that speaks volumes, and then I think we have to examine why. Late President Jayawardena, who is the architect of 1978 Constitution, Second Republican Constitution, famously said during 1994 that don't throw. When the government was actually all geared up to abolish executive presidency, he said that. So that's what happened. So therefore, I thought that we have to actually look at it objectively. Why it's needed and what's there. So my point is, I am now taking a reformist stand. I see the executive presidency was vested upon absolute powers due to some historical conditions. But now it's time to actually reform it, reduce powers, and make it more democratic. So at the moment, I think that's the feasible option.
You very well touch upon the fact that since 1994, the abolishing of the executive presidency became the main slogan for any presidential candidate to come into power, and they all promised that the executive presidency will be abolished.
Yes.
But when this government came, the main idea that this particular government promoted was to have a Lichavi type of a governance in this country. That is quietly accepted, or very well accepted by the people, because we know that it's the good governance that we want. So in that respect, have we achieved the objectives of becoming a more democratic society, a society or a governance that paves way for the people to exercise their economic, political, social and cultural democracy or freedom?
Well, I look at it as a process. We have to take note of the fact that we have gone through a violent conflict, 30 years of conflict in the north and also in the south. So that damaged the country so much. So we managed to actually conclude the war and become a post-war country. But we were struggling soon after the war to become a post-conflict country, because conflict was still simmering. So I think what happened was in 2015 that we managed to electorally defeat the presidency and forge a new alliance and new government and change the constitution to a certain extent to democratize it more and create platform for freedoms. So therefore I see it as a process, and we are in the verge of becoming a post-conflict country, and that would also link to the becoming a upper middle income country, because peace is linked with prosperity, and peace and prosperity will also help democracy to sustain. If we lose peace and prosperity, people will not see the value of democracy. On the other hand, without democracy, the prosperity and peace is in danger. Why I say this? I think that the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was a very important historical point in our constitution, our history, because that actually tried to democratize the executive presidency and democratize the constitution. So that is the foundation, and that foundation is there now. So norm is set. Now it's about implementation. But people don't see what's been already achieved. So we are actually looking at the day-to-day events and say, getting disappointed and all. But I think it's time to examine what we have achieved since 2015.
Comparatively, the present government has given the people much more freedom of expression than any of the governments in the past after the 78 Constitution came in gave. And I have spoken this matter earlier also with you, Sudarshana, that when it comes to freedom of expression, which is one of the main pillars of a democratic society, and you being especially the Director General of Government Information is quite aware that the government has given this freedom to a very great extent. So, considering that, do you think that providing freedoms like that of expression, we are getting much more tightened up in the government affairs?
Yes. Fundamentally, the freedoms are important in democracy. And that's why this constitution, the importance of the 1978 constitution is, even though it introduced the executive presidency, all-powerful executive presidency, but it also introduced a fundamental rights chapter with the justiciable rights, where people feel that their rights are infringed or about to infringe, can go to the Supreme Court and seek redress. So, among all these rights, it's very, very important to maintain the foundational rights or the basic democratic rights, that is the right to freedom of expression, right to freedom of assembly, and right to freedom of association. We have come across a situation where these rights were actually curtailed in the name of national security, in the name of economic freedom. But the opposition came into power promising that we upheld these rights. So government is duty bound to respect, protect and fulfill these rights. It's not actually government gave these rights, government recognized that people's inherent right to have these freedoms. So these freedoms are very important because that allow the dissent to come in. So dissent is always irritating. As a Director General of Government Information, I would be happy to see that all papers carry my communiques, or all stations carry them. But I don't have that luxury. I have to fight for my space. Also, I have to fight against various statements based on facts and based on non-facts. So, but that's democracy. So we have to actually find our way, and we have to be better equipped and efficient and effective in our communication. So the government is in a tight spot, obviously. That's why when you watch news, especially late night editions, you go to sleep thinking that government will crumble tomorrow morning, because all you see is actually the trouble. But morning you wake up, So government is there. And you read papers in the morning, and you see that, government will be over. But I think for 3.5 years, we have witnessed this. Now people are getting used to this. That's the kind of democracy we have. So some people obviously don't like that because that we are not used to. For 30 years, we have used to become a control society. So the country was ruled since 1971 for a long time. I think throughout our lifetime under the emergency regulations. So when you have emergency, then that is that the executive can suspend any law except for the constitution. So the freedoms that we achieve through various laws enacted by the parliament, the representatives of the people, can be taken away by the executive. So actually in the last decade we have witnessed, even though the constitution was not supposed to be suspended or constitutional rights are not supposed to be sort of curtailed by the emergency regulations, we had a situation where certain parts of the constitution was not implemented. For example, under the 17th Amendment, we had a constitutional council. That council was actually designed to make appointments to the independent commissions and also make appointments to the high posts. But that constitutional council was not established, disregarding the constitution. And the executive decided to make these appointments. So I think we have actually changed that. It's very important that dissent is there, so the government can always correct themselves. When the press is shouting, when the TV stations rightly or wrongly say things, government is in a position to actually correct themselves. That's a hallmark of democracy. And it links to the business. Because business essentially is that individuals or group of individuals come together, use their entrepreneurship and find capital and then actually make investment. They need to see that government policy is consistent. They need to see that government is not actually arbitrarily acting. Otherwise, they can't do business. So when the government is acting, going against their interest, they should be able to say things freely. They should have instrument to actually tell the government, don't do this. So that's what we are seeing. One simple example, the doctors, the specialist doctors, went and had a discussion with the government. They said that, they have been taxing so much. Also, that their services in the private hospitals also been taxed. So government also had an argument. Government said everybody should be taxed based on their income. But finally, government agreed not to reduce the tax based on the income, because that's the universal principle, but actually reduce or exempt the taxes government imposed on the services by the medical doctors provided in the private hospitals. So that's a persuasive power of negotiation. That's only possible in a democracy. Because a democracy is a place where you have different people with competing interests. So how can you allow these different interests to express unless you have a freedom of expression? So it's very much linked to business. Even though in Sri Lanka, human rights and business are not considered something interconnected. A lot of business people don't see human rights and the freedoms are important. But this is what actually happens. So I think this discussion needs to take forward. Dan.
This morning in Coffee with Dan, I have Mr.Sudarshana Gunawardana, attorney at law, who is also the Director General of Government Information, talking with me about the type of leadership the country needs. Now, Sudarshana, we have seen in countries like Singapore, where Lee Kuan Yew ruled the country in a kind of, with a mighty arm, of course, and also Mahathir Mohamad ruling Malaysia. And some sector of the Sri Lankan community think that we need a dictator to run the country. Now, there had been some talks generating aftermath a certain incident by a religious leader in Sri Lanka, and it was widely talked about, should Sri Lanka have a dictator to run. Now, the 1978 constitution gives the executive president certain powers of dictatorship, like the late President J.R. Jayawardena, who was the architect of the 1978 constitution, once said, what a executive president in Sri Lanka can't do is to convert a man to a woman and a woman to a man.
But he couldn't stop the war.
So in that respect, my question is, do we need a dictator?
My answer is no. I think in modern times, it's not feasible to have a dictator. Even a dictator will have to disguise himself as a democrat. Because the world, the present world order, does not allow dictators to actually flourish for a long time. And dictators will end in a very catastrophic manner, as we have witnessed in our own country, especially in the north, where a dictator has been actually ruled a de facto state in the north. But what happened at the end? He didn't allow to the dissent. He destroyed all the dissent, and he was the sole decision maker who decided that he waged a war, or he continued the war. He deliberately paved the way to the defeat of the Prime Minister who signed a peace accord with him by launching a boycott in that area. But at the end, what happened? So, my answer is no. So I have to give my answers, my reasons. Now, you said that Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir Mohamad, and also about J.R. Jayawardena. J.R. Jayawardena has said somewhere that under this constitution, executive president is capable of everything except for making a man into a woman and woman into a man. But the point is that he couldn't do so many things. And in his reign, actually, we experienced two bloody conflicts. In 1983, there was a war under the executive presidency, and 1987, there is a civil war in the south. So, what is that? So, therefore, and also the French philosopher Jacques Derrida famously said that there is no meaning outside the context. So, everything you have to take into the consideration, considering the context. So, Mahathir Mohamad cannot be take out of the context. And look at Mahathir Mohamad then and Mahathir Mohamad today. Mahathir Mohamad today fought for democracy as an opposition dissenter. So, and also J.R. Jayawardena era was a different era. Let's focus on J.R. Jayawardena. Let Mr. J.R. Jayawardena actually won an election with 5-6 majority. And he saw a country, almost a socialist, de facto socialist country. The economy was fully nationalized. Radio was a monopoly. Newspapers completely nationalized. Banks nationalized. All the industries nationalized. So private sector had no space. Only the cronies could flourish. There was a protectionism. And there were long queues. People were actually, waiting for change, and they used their only weapon they had, that was the franchise. And then he wanted a strong government to make reforms possible. So executive presidency a lot of people think that it's a very powerful institution, but it's powerful only when you have the support of the legislature. And Jayawardena was powerful because he had a legislature elected under the previous constitution. Therefore, under the first past post system, he had 5/6 majority. So he had the super majority, 2/3 majority, any time to actually change the constitution. During his tenure, he changed the constitution, his 10 years, 16 times the constitution was changed. 16 times. So that shows that he was powerful because he had a parliament to back him. And then he won again. But in 1982, he didn't go for the general election because he saw that had he gone for general election, he would not get the supermajority under the PR. So instead what he did, he extended the tenure of parliament by 6 years by calling a referendum. So see, the presidency was powerful when you have this situation. And then look at President Premadasa. He was elected when the country was in civil war. He got merely 50 point something. Once he got elected, and he said that there will be no opposition anymore, that everybody will work together. But what happened? Soon after his election, country got into a very severe civil war that ended up with killing 30,000 people. And within very short period, I think 3 years, actually within very short period, he had to face a impeachment from the parliament. So parliament actually rebelled against him, even though he managed to suppress that rebellion. He has been assassinated, and country plunged into a very difficult period. So why the President Kumartunga wanted to abolish executive presidency? Because she saw that the problems inherited. And then after that, I think 94, everybody wanted to abolish it, but could not get abolished completely. So therefore, I think it depends. So even now, since you asked this question, now what we have is, at present, we don't have the same executive presidency. Parliament managed to got back its power, put its act together, and considerably weaken the powers of executive presidency. So now even if you get a so-called toughie to become executive president, and president will have to act under the constitution, so he cannot do whatever he pleases. If he is trying to do that, if he or she, that is violation of constitution. Also violation of international world order, because we live in a globalized world. No country is immune from that. Every country have to make sure that its action are in concert with the other countries. Look at Donald Trump. And he has been, he's an unconventional leader, kind of a tough leader, and elected unexpectedly and was trying to do many things. Now what's happening? And he's almost waged a trade war with US main ally, Europe. European Union is now actually at a trade war. So we have to see that. So in that context, we see there is no space for a dictator in the modern world, and especially in the South Asian context. Look at even Saudi Arabia. Such a orthodox country is now relaxing their laws. So we are talking about going back to dictatorship. I think there was something wrong.
Now, one of the very famous statement in the past by the great Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore was at that time to make another Colombo, Singapore to be another Colombo. But they went on to become what they are now in the modern world. But however, Singapore doesn't have that much of democracy or freedom towards the people's political will. It's been suppressed to a certain extent, even though we see a beautiful country, a beautiful economy, and so forth. And also Germany, who had the world's most dangerous dictator, Hitler. The German envoy to Sri Lanka recently has mentioned that a statement of Sri Lanka needs a person like Hitler is quite outrageous, or well outrageous. You know, in that context, it is proven, like even you are a friend of Germany, I know. Now Germany has developed as one of the main successful and greatest economies in the world, but without a dictator. It is a people's republic that people choose their own leader. And you also mentioned the fact that with an executive presidency in place under the constitution, and that the executive president cannot violate the constitution, we have seen several occasions in the past that the president himself violated certain provisions of the constitution. And we saw the ousting of the Chief Justice, for example, at that time. So should we go back to such a scenario?
No, then it's very, very important that you mentioned Germany. Now, Germany is such a powerful country now. After all this devastation created by Hitler, that kind of a leader, actually recently the not famous actually, a very senior monk has said that, mentioning to one leader that, even be like Hitler. So, if you witness the devastation created by Hitler, you would never say things like that. And whole world actually unanimous that nobody actually praise Hitler anymore. Now, he made such a devastation, but that country came back, and countries are now such a powerful economy, a superpower. But that was achieved through democracy. And one part of the country earlier, the eastern part, was under dictatorship. What happened after the fall of Berlin Wall? There was a unification. And unification is a unification of the dictatorship, the country under dictatorship, to the democracy. Now the present Chancellor Angela Merkel is coming from the former eastern part. Now she is ruling in her fourth term, if I'm not mistaken, third or fourth term, Angela Merkel. But it took 2 months or 3 months for them to forge an alliance, because that election results was not very clear. So there was a political upheaval, and two parties had to negotiate and renegotiate and finally forge a very, very shaky alliance. But that doesn't mean Germany economy is in disarray. The political instability does not always lead to the weaken of the economy, and economy can flourish, because that shows that democracy is in place. And you mentioned about Sri Lanka, where the executive presidents willfully violate the constitution. Mind you that there's a provision that violating executive presidents tend to try and violate the constitution, but that is a ground for impeachment. Willful violation of the constitution is a ground for an impeachment. What happened was, during the war, the president violated constitution, then president, and people kept quiet. the judiciary kept quiet, academia kept quiet, people kept quiet because of the war. I think people wanted somebody to take control and somebody to act as a sort of superpower. So he actually suspended certain parts of the constitution and people did not take care. After the war and after the elections, winning presidential and also then managed to winning considerably the parliamentary election, he went for change the constitution, and that actually he made the changes he made de facto de jure changes by 18th Amendment. That is, he legalized these violations. And by doing so, the President Rajapaksa weakened the parliament so much, and weakened the judiciary, and weakened the independent institutions. And look at what he did. And he did that constitutionally. He got it approved by 2/3 majority. Now, according to our constitution, you know that the president is head of state, head of government, head of cabinet, and the leader of the armed forces. He could appoint cabinet of ministers. He could assign any subject to any minister, and he could assign subject to himself. So he's all powerful. Under the 18th Amendment, actually he consolidated that power by allowing him to contest as many as terms. So term limit was taken away. And under the 17th Amendment, certain changes were made to the Constitution. Therefore, the appointment to the high post, like the Attorney General, like the IGP, and like the appointment to the superior courts, there was a check and balance system where the president proposed and the Constitutional Assembly actually appoints. Under the 18th Amendment, he took away that power. He abolished the Constitutional Assembly, Constitutional Council, and he created the symbolic place called a rubber stamp institution called Parliamentary Council, where it has to only approve his decisions. And he himself is appointing Superior Court judges, appointing Attorney General, appointing IGP. So you appoint the Prime Minister, you appoint the Cabinet of Ministers, you appoint everybody. And even independent commissions, like Human Rights Commission or the Public Service Commission, the Police Commission, he made the appointments. So what we did as a country under the 19th Amendment was to reverse this effect. Now the president cannot do all these things. And our president actually willfully agreed to reduce his powers for the sake of democracy. Without his support, it would not have been possible. But he basically said that, we need to have a more proper democratic state. Therefore, now, look at the high post, like the appointment of the Supreme Court judges. Now, President only proposes names. And the 10-member Constitutional Council has to make appointments. Attorney General and the IGP, the same process. And present Chief Justice, present IGP, and present Attorney General, all three people were appointed through that process. President proposed, and the Constitutional Council deliberates and finally decides who will be there. There were three names proposed by the President to become IGP, and Constitutional Council only decided, okay, the present IGP, the post judge should be the IGP. And same went for the Attorney General and the Chief Justice. Three names are proposed. The Council picked one name in their choice. Therefore, these institutions have become more independent. And now all these three positions cannot be dismissed, terminated. They have to serve until the age of retirement. And there cannot be extensions even. Because sometimes executive decided to give extensions and win the hearts and minds of these positions. So that it's not possible. So now because there's a lot of discussion about law and order, a lot of discussion about the punishing the culprits and all these things and bringing the culprits to the book. Now these three arms operate separately. The investigation arm is headed by the police. It's a separate independent body. And even public can complain to the police commission, that is also independent commission. That commission is appointed solely by the Constitutional Council. President has nothing to do with that. And IGP is an independent position, semi-independent position. He is responsible to the parliament only. And he cannot be taken away. And once the investigations are over, it will be handed over to the prosecution, the Attorney General's Department. That's another independent body again. And then, once the prosecution is done, the adjudication, the administration of justice is done by the judiciary, that is also independent. So now these processes become independent. And now you have a Human Rights Commission, Public Service Commission, Judicial Service Commission, Election Commission, and other commissions to oversee various functions. So you can see the independent state is being slowly growing outside of the political pressures. So that is actually a very good environment for business. That's why our economy is actually slowly picking up. That's why our foreign investments are growing. That's why there's a environment for. So I'm just saying this so people can just look at the facts. The facts are available. There's a right to information. That also created under this present constitutional amendments. Right to information has become a fundamental right. And then there's enabling legislation, Right to Information Act. Any citizen who feels that government has important information and can make a free of charge RTI application and ask for this information. So these things actually paved way for more democratic society. And one more thing is that the Procurement Commission. National Procurement Commission was established. Now Procurement Commission is an independent commission. Now we should guidelines for procurements. So a lot of corruption was possible because the country was going through a period where you bypass the tender procedure. You actually, encourage unsolicited proposals with the sovereign guarantees. But now, not anymore. You have to go through these tender processes. So all in all, you create a situation good for business, good for entrepreneurs, business-friendly situation. And to do business, you need freedoms. And if anybody thinks that they need a dictator to get rid of all these freedoms and run the country to the dark ages, I don't think it's possible. People will resist.
With all those areas that you mention, the democratic society's organs and elements are now getting into the right shapes and positions. My final question to you today is, what sort of a leader that Sri Lanka should have presently and in the future?
We need to have a leader who could facilitate leadership in others. When you have a leader who is omnipresent and who can do everything, all the others tend to become passive. But when you have a situation where your leader is actually not that totality, he's also a weak person, he's also a sin, and he also, make mistakes, then you create a situation where others can come in and fill the gaps. So that's a democratic leadership. You don't need an all-powerful leader who is like, wearing white all the time and actually talking about all the good things. You need somebody who understands and facilitate. But apart from that, I think at this point, a leader must be well versed with international affairs, international commerce, because at the present context, no country can survive without international trade. And a country like Sri Lanka, where the national income is very low compared to the GDP, has to pick up. And to pick up, you need to promote exports. You can't promote exports unless you understand these nuanced approaches. For example, you must be a leader who has the courage to actually take bold decisions. And decisions could be unpopular. But in the long run, decisions will pave way for a better future. For example, under this leadership, Sri Lanka, the present President and Prime Minister sent their Foreign Minister, the present Finance Minister, to Geneva. And Minister Mangal Samaravira in 2015 went to Geneva and said that, that we were under severe criticism of international community for human rights violations. And he said that, yes, we have done, we accept that, there have been certain allegations that our own people are complaining. And this government was elected by all these people. So we will have our own domestic mechanism after consultation with the people. So we don't want any international presence because we are managing to manage, we are able to manage our affairs. So that he told that and everybody accepted. And there was a unanimously accepted, and there was a resolution in 2015, 30/1 resolution that actually request Sri Lankan government to implement their own domestic mechanisms. And a lot of people criticize that. After 3 years, now we see there's no international interference now. We are running our own domestic affairs. We are in the good books and we got a lot of benefits. Especially the European Union decided that we will be eligible to come under the GSP Plus scheme. Only 9 countries enjoy these benefits. So when you are entitled to GSP Plus scheme, unlike GSP Plus provides you with the opportunity to export goods tax-free. And that helps to capture the European market. But that is very much linked to the Geneva resolution. Not because of this Geneva, this resolution expresses the Sri Lanka's obligations under the various international instruments. And we have been neglecting. So the government had a boldness to go and say, yes, we have accepted these human rights obligations and we will go forward, and we are capable enough of doing that. So countries benefited. So businesses benefited. A lot of people who make their export, the fish products and other products, coir and all these to the Europe, they know what I say. But they don't see necessarily the link between the decisions made in Geneva and the decisions made in Brussels, the link. And also, that is owing to the leadership we have, which normally people see as a weak leadership, but in this perceived weakness lies the strength.
This morning in Coffee with Dan, I had Mr.Sudarshana Gunawardana, attorney at law. He's also the Director General of the Government Information. And we talked about the type of leadership the country needs. So thank you very much, Sudarshana, for being this morning in Coffee with Dan.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So let's meet up with another interesting topic in Coffee with Dan next week.